What happened in between was that the crisis hit these regions particularly. The vulnerability of the blue economy and of the regions depending on the ocean ecosystems was actually very much revealed by the crisis. And this specificity is also particularly, there is a kind of a concentration of vulnerability in maritime regions, in regions depending on the ocean. Sometimes not because they are linked to the ocean ecosystems, but because they might be very specialized on tourism, on fisheries. And when you're specialized, you're more prone to be very impacted socioeconomically by such a crisis. And also because as regions of interfaces, they also concentrate movements, concentrate population, which is of course something that increased the vulnerability to this health crisis. So we are going to be discussing that today, the economic and social impact of the crisis. But I just wanted to remind us that yes, this vulnerability might be specific, but it's also what was so important when we met before the crisis, saying this is why the marine region, the blue economy sectors, the blue economy regions need to be the pioneers for transition, because they need to do that because of their link to the ecosystems. Maybe also we might discuss that afterward, but I focus the example on specialization. Of course, that is asking a lot of questions about rediversification and also about the question of the race between those regions to attract investors through lowering taxes or social and environmental ambitions. That could be another scenario coming out of the crisis. And we know very much how globalization can lead to that. And this is one of the reasons we believe that we need to have coordination possibilities at a higher scale, at regional scale in particular. So this is where we stand now. We want to do a kind of a diagnosis of the crisis that you have been experiencing in the different regions, how that has revealed vulnerability, and to what extent we could nevertheless use the moment of the crisis as an opportunity to really go for the transformation as a survival issue, because that's the way forward for these regions, to increase resilience, to go for the transformation. And yes, of course, there are lots of issues about coordination. And this is why I think the Marine Regions Forum is really useful, could be useful in this current situation. And this is where I give it over to you, Alexander.
Thanks a lot, Sebastian. Before introducing our first speakers for opening statements, I would like to add 3 very brief thoughts. The first one is about the specific challenges and opportunities provided by marine regions. We had discussed it before, and we had decided that a Marine Regions Forum aiming at supporting international processes, not replacing and not competing, supporting international processes, would provide a platform or a room where experience, lessons learned, challenges can be exchanged in order to better understand what is needed for marine regions. My feeling, our feeling is that this is exactly what we have to do in time of this crisis. To look at the specific challenges, the specific opportunities, and what is needed for marine regions and how regional cooperation could help to tackle it in order to influence intergovernmental processes. The second issue, when you are growing older, you can look back and you say, I was involved in zoonotic disease management maybe for 2 decades. Very seldom one could find the importance of oceans in all these documents. I was looking yesterday in the evening in an important foresight study published in 2005 with a very good plan what needs to be done to tackle zoonotic diseases, and COVID-19 is one. You can find the word ocean, marine, not very often. In the whole debate on One Health, of course, this has opened up and marine regions are more involved. And therefore, that's my second message, I would like to send, based on your input, some messages about the importance, consideration of marine regions when we are coming to building back better and becoming more resilient. One has to be involved in the public debate so that all the other big problems, and the world is full of big problems, realize we cannot forget the marine areas, we cannot forget the marine regions, because they also can help us to tackle the crisis and to become more resilient. And my very last comment is, we have talked a lot about the climate crisis and what might happen. Is COVID-19 kind of a window that opens and gives us a perspective and a look into the future, how a real crisis can impact everybody, every business, everything we are doing, and what do we have to learn from the reaction so far in order to link it to what we also have to do to adapt to climate change or to mitigate changing climatic conditions. So this huge crisis, it's a once in, over the last 100 years, we never had a similar situation that a virus spread all over the world and impacted everything. We have global responses to it. We want to discuss with you, what does this mean for regions? What do we need to take up in order to strengthen marine regions? How can we offer support? And how can we and how do we have to learn pathways towards sustainability? That's the task. You are the experts. We are listening carefully, and in the end, we try to put it together. What I have to do now as moderator is giving the floor for 2 opening statements. First of all, to Lilian Busse. Lilian, thanks a lot for coming. You are leading the Department of Environmental Health and the Protection of Ecosystems at the German Environment Agency. We have asked you to speak about 5 minutes. As a moderator, you're always a little dictator, and you will remind the speakers after 5 minutes, please come to an end. I will try to do it also. So Lilian, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Looking forward to listen to your opening statement.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alexander. And I'm sure I will stay in the 5 minutes. Dear Mrs. Veit, dear ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues from the ocean governance community, I'm happy to open this meeting today. I was also actually at the first meeting, Marine Regions Forum in Berlin in fall of 2019. And like someone said before, that we actually were able to meet there in person. So we received positive feedback from that first meeting, thanks to all the experts and the participants who were heavily involved. I was actually involved in one of the marine litter breakout sessions, and the exchange of knowledge and experience in the Marine Region Forum seemed to be really helpful to the participants and also thereafter. 2020 was supposed to be the super ocean year, but instead it became the year of the global pandemic. So many meetings were canceled, the SDG 14 UN Governance or Conference in Lisbon, and also the Our Ocean Conference in Palau. All those were postponed, and also some of that and some of the ocean governance processes were at least partly put on hold. However, discussion and meetings, at least some of them, are still happening and mostly online. The EU Commission was holding a meeting in December of 2020, the International Ocean Governance Forum, and we might hear about that a little later. And also under the Portuguese EU presidency, the topic of integrated maritime policy, ocean governance, and sustainable blue economy will be one of the priorities. So we're exciting to hold another workshop today on ocean governance and COVID-19. So the economy is under pressure, we heard that, and people are changing their habits. So what does it mean for environmental policy in the long term? The German Environment Agency actually worked in several task groups on the topic of COVID-19 and environmental policy and sustainability. And we published several discussion and position papers on that. And so I would like to highlight 3 of them, and that might be interesting for you for the next discussion points you have in this workshop. One was on sustainable pathways out of the corona crisis. We all know that the pandemic is causing considerable social and economic disruption worldwide. And the short-term and mid-term financial support measures for mitigating these consequences must be structured in a way that they support the needed long-term changes towards a more sustainable and climate neutral society. And this paper actually contains an action plan for Germany. The second papers are about the lessons learned from the Corona crisis. Are new guiding principles required for environmental and sustainable policy? The paper reflects which guiding principles for the future of environmental and sustainability policy might be necessary in addition to the ones we already have in place. And then the third paper is on international environmental and sustainability policy during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. This paper actually discusses the consequences of COVID-19 pandemic for global economy and geopolitics. The paper proposes approaches for substantive reorientation of international and environmental and sustainability policy. I would like to quote from an interview from our president. Once the Corona crisis has been overcome, the economic reboot should also be a switch to a sustainable economy. Even if it sounds paradox, the timing has never been as favorable as now, simply because so much money is available to overcome the crisis. The G2 countries are spending $12 to $20 trillion, which is the largest stimulus package in human history. If we were to invest that now into the direction of climate protection, then the Corona crisis could become a springboard for greater sustainability. I would like now to circle back to ocean governance and COVID-19. In addition to my work at the German Environment Agency, I'm also chairing HELCOM, the Helsinki Convention. And I'm doing this since July of 2020. So I started actually in the Corona crisis and during COVID-19 conditions. My last business trip actually was to Helsinki to get to know all the colleagues in the HELCOM Secretariat and all the people from the contracting parties. And here I would like to share some experiences from the last 6 months chairing HELCOM, a regional ocean governance. So first to the interactions. We all know the work on ocean governance is still going on, but under more difficult conditions. There are some challenges, and we know we all have to meet these challenges. The discussions are somewhat more difficult. The negotiations are a challenge, and the face-to-face meetings are missing because sometimes we can solve problems inside conversation during those meetings. Of course, one good thing is we all travel less. Also for today's workshop, we all travel less, so less CO2 emissions, and maybe we can carry some of that in the future as well. And then secondly, to the Baltic Sea and from a technical perspective. There are less environmental monitoring at sea going on in 2020 and also in 2021. So what does that mean? We have reduced monitoring data. We probably have more difficult assessments, and we have gaps in our long-term monitoring data. On the science side, there are less cruises out there to do the science and to implement the projects. And actually the extent of both, we will only see later this year when we look at the data. And then maybe on the positive side, at least from the perspective of the Baltic Sea, the reduced passenger traffic, including the cruise ships, has most likely reduced the discharge of sewage, gray water, and also food well waste, as well as noise pollution, underwater noise pollution, and also reduced noise pollution in ports. However, this needs to be verified in case we have data. Not sure if we ever see these data. And likely this will be only short term, and we need to find long-term solutions for all these problems.
Thank you very much, Lilian. And without further comments, I would like to give the floor to Veronika Feitz from the European Commission, Directorate General for Maritime Affairs and Fisheries. We like to call it DG Mare.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Alexander, for introducing me. Let me welcome you also from the side of the European Commission to this workshop on ocean governance and COVID-19, building resilience for marine regions. We as European Commission, we are really glad to co-host this meeting at the beginning of the new year, together with Germany, with IDDRI, IASS, and TMG, as part of our engagement in the Marine Regions Forum. And let me also say that I'm particularly honored to open this workshop in the presence of such prominent people like my previous political master, Maria Damenaki, and her continuous counterpart across the ocean, Jane Lubchenco, and also our special envoy from UN on Oceans, Peter Thompson. Very happy to see you in this meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Busse has said it, last year was supposed to be the super year for the oceans, but unfortunately, it turned out to be the year of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that obviously had a strong spillover effects on ocean governance. The crisis had, and it still has, a variety of impacts on ocean governance, and I will name a few of them only. So the way of working has completely changed, and this almost overnight. Conferences and key events had to be postponed or changed to virtual meetings. Negotiations slowed down. Policy and decision-making in international fora had to be limited to the essential and was just enough to fill some gaps. Travel restrictions and sanitary measures caused significant market disruptions that severely hit the blue economy, in particular fisheries and aquaculture. Seafarers got stuck at sea and unable to repatriate. They were forced to continue working beyond acceptable terms, and this posing risks to their health and safety. And increasingly what we see now are discarded face masks are becoming a common sight, and this not only in the street, but also on the beach as a new type of marine litter, as if we hadn't already enough of marine litter in our seas. But these are just a few examples. There's much more. So what did the European Union do in order to react to this crisis situation? I'm quite proud that the European Union has reacted quickly. First, we provided an ad hoc shock response, I would call it. Already in April 2020, we amended the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund to introduce temporary emergency support for the fishing and aquaculture sector. These exceptional measures included compensation for economic losses caused by the public health crisis until the end of last year. We also established guidelines facilitating the resumption of crew changes and the repatriation within the EU and for EU seafarers, and we supported actively similar measures internationally in the International Maritime Organization, the International Labour Organization, and the UN General Assembly. Second, we set the ground for a sustainable and sound recovery within the European Union, and this in line with what we call in our jargon the European Green Deal. And this we did notably through the adoption of a new biodiversity strategy for 2030 and the so-called Farm to Fork strategy. Because in our view, COVID-19 cannot be an excuse to curb our ambitions for a more sustainable path. Sustainability has to be at the core of economic recovery. The crisis has also shown us the importance of the ecosystem approach, both in marine conservation and restoration, as well as for the sustainable use of marine resources. And this has become more important than ever to address the cumulative impacts on the marine environment. It has also shown that both fisheries and aquaculture have to be part of our economic recovery strategy. Both are needed for resilient and sustainable seafood systems, to meet a growing demand for fish and seafood products by a growing population, as well as to provide jobs and ensure the livelihood of coastal communities. Third, very importantly, we made the money available for building back better in our member states with the so-called Next Generation European Union initiative. This was launched at the end of last year. This temporary 750 billion euro recovery fund will drive the European Union's transition to climate neutrality, increased resilience, halting biodiversity loss, moving to zero pollution, and a fair digital transformation that leaves no one behind. Fourth, externally, our new Neighborhood Development International Cooperation Instrument, which in short is called NDC, and its Team Europe initiatives will support our partner countries around the world with 20 billion euro to fight the coronavirus and to come out stronger from the crisis. Let me underline that both our internal and external funding instruments include the oceans and allow to fund investments in maritime activities and coastal areas. And we do hope that our third country partners and also our member states will use this opportunity for that purpose. And last but not least, we take account of the crisis and the need for sustainable recovery in our ocean-related policy making. We will adopt very soon a new strategic approach for the blue economy. This will become a very powerful vector on the road to sustainability in Europe. It will transcribe the European Green Deal into the development of the maritime sector and activities. Our International Ocean Governance Forum in December last year, it has been mentioned, dedicated a session to resilient governance and sustainable recovery strategies. The results of this forum are now turned into final recommendations for actions that will guide us in the European Commission in the further development of our international ocean governance agenda we put in place in 2016. Key messages from the discussions include that we need to learn from this crisis. We need to build robust and risk-responsive management approaches, and we need to promote integrated policy making to strengthen ocean resilience. In this context, regional ocean governance, the theme of today's discussions, provides a crucial link between the global objectives on the one hand and national competencies towards integrated governance. It's also key to translate the ecosystem-based management approach into practice as a prerequisite for ocean sustainability. Sustainability is already a central element in our environmental, fisheries and maritime policies in the European Union. But we cannot act alone, and this is why we are supporting strengthening regional ocean governance, also as a part of our international ocean governance agenda. Dialogue platforms like the Marine Region Forum and the workshop today provide the space for exchange and for cross-fertilization across sectors and boundaries. They are really key for policy coordination and coherence. So let me conclude. I very much look forward to the exchanges that will take place today, and I'm really confident that they will support the development and fine-tuning of sustainable responses in marine regions to COVID impacts. So thank you very much for your attention, and I really wish you fruitful discussions throughout the afternoon, which will also inspire the European Commission in its update on ocean governance. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thanks a lot to both of you, Lilian and Veronika, for sharing insights in unprecedented action. What has happened over the last 12 to 14 months in the Commission, in the ministries, in the German Environment Agency is unprecedented. It has never happened before. And thanks for sharing the insight, for informing us what has been done, for also outlining what will be the challenges of the future. I have to say it's a great introduction to a complex discussion we are going to have now. And because it's going to become complex, I'm handing over to Sébastien Dreyer because he's introducing the speakers and he is guiding the next round for our panelists. Sébastien, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. I bet you would be also very, very efficient on complex issues. Thank you very much to our two introductory speakers to have set the scene of the support of also to the Marine Regions Forum and why it's important that we gather this way. On the agenda, we have now a first session that is going to set the scene. To some extent, we will expand the scope from Germany and Europe to the whole world. And what we intend to be able to have is a kind of a feedback from the different regions also or for the reality on the ground in different regions on how the crisis has unfolded and what are the impacts and what is actually done now to try and recover and what is the direction that is taken. I was mentioning in my introductory words that it's important that we don't take the wrong pathway. That might be the pathway taken if we don't regulate differently, for instance, the competition between territories. But that's just one element that I throw in the discussion, and there are many others. So because there are so many other ways to look at our discussion, what we had proposed is that we will have first an introductory speech by Professor Jane Lubchenco, professor at Oregon State University. Jane Lubchenco is, of course, one of the key eminent specialists of the ocean community. But in particular, she was instrumental in the high-level ocean panel, a recent initiative led by 14 world governments on sustainable ocean economy. And Jane, in that regard, could help us gain a world observation on what has happened with COVID crisis and the efforts for recovery. We asked also David Obura to some extent to react from his on-the-ground situation in the Indian Ocean. David is the founding director of Cordio, a leading NGO in the Western Indian Ocean, and he was a coordinating lead author in the IPBES Global Assessment Report launched in 2019. But he's also one of the key people. He could be talking for the marine region of the Western Indian Ocean. And so we asked David to react to the panorama that will be given by Jane. After that, with Alexander, we will moderate a panel of discussion with three eminent other speakers. Kirsten Stendal. Kirsten is head of the Ecosystems Integration Branch of UN Environment. Thank you very much to all the panelists to be here. It's really good that we have also the UN represented. The UN will also be represented through Vera Agostini. Vera is Deputy Director, Fisheries and Aquaculture Division at FAO. And we will also have Chip Cunliffe. Chip is the Director for Sustainable Development at AXA XL, a branch of the AXA Group. And in particular, Chip is co-chair of the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, a multi-sector collaboration between governments, financial institutions, the insurance industry, environmental organizations, and stakeholders from the Global South. So this is what is going to happen in the next session. And without further ado, I think what is very important is that we give enough time for Jane Lubchenco to give her keynote.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Can you see my screen? We're all good? Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes, we can.
It is such a pleasure to join you. Thank you for this invitation. I think this meeting just could not be more important and more timely. And I thank you to all of you for all the work that has already transpired. We've had a bit of a respite, and now we have time to think about what's really needed and take the smartest action possible in light of all of the current changes and challenges that have already been mentioned. It's my pleasure to join you today and focus on some of the results and thinking that has transpired over the last couple of years. I'm delighted to see so many colleagues and dear friends on this in this meeting, but a particular shout out to people who have been involved in the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy, specifically Peter Thompson as the UN Secretary General Special Envoy for the Ocean, who has been with the 14 global leaders throughout this journey. Christian Teleki, who was in charge of the Secretariat at the World Resources Institute. My dear friend Maria Damanaki, who co-chaired the advisory network for the high-level panel. And so my presence here is representative of a much larger group of people. I am taking the opportunity to share with you some of the information that we have been gathering and acting on, but we'll focus it specifically on this sustainable and equitable blue recovery, which I think is so urgently needed. My key take-home messages for you are very simple. The ocean sector has been disproportionately affected by this coronavirus pandemic in ways that have not truly been recognized for the devastation that they have caused. Number two, many of the stimulus recovery packages have ignored the opportunities in the ocean But number three, there are immense opportunities to build back better, as has already been noted, but to stimulate immediate recovery, to address some of the immediate challenges that COVID has caused, but in so doing, also enable the kind of action that's needed to get us to more sustainable, resilient ocean and coastal communities and peoples and economies. If we are smart, we can really accomplish multiple things in a more effective, efficient manner. The high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy consisted of 14 sitting heads of state, prime ministers and presidents, who have worked together over about 2 years period of time to think strategically and act smartly about how they, as individual leaders of their countries, how they can affect their regions, and indeed work together for global action around sustainable ocean economy. Peter Thompson, again, has been with the group the whole time. And he mentioned to us as we were waiting for this call to begin that his 6-month-old granddaughter, Rose, has been paying special attention to all of this because, in fact, it's her world that is at stake. These 14 global leaders were focused squarely on the intersection of these three goals: how we can produce more from the ocean in a sustainable fashion, more energy, more food, for example, by protecting it effectively and using it smartly. And so the protect effectively refers explicitly to addressing climate change, to adopting full protection of 30% of the ocean by 2030, by having sustainable ocean plans that are integrated, but do so in a way that is prospering equitably. And so the benefits and the power are shared. And so it's the intersection of these three: protect effectively, produce sustainably, and prosper equitably, that underpins all of what the high-level panel has been doing. Not surprisingly to many of you, because I think you share this philosophy, before jumping into action, the Ocean Panel members said, let's begin with an assessment of what we know and be guided by the knowledge of scientists and other experts. And so the initial focus was generating syntheses of knowledge through these 16 special knowledge assessments that covered a series of topics that were identified by the panel members, complemented by some additional special reports, one of which we're going to focus on today: the Sustainable and Equitable Blue Recovery to the COVID Crisis. And those formed the foundation, if you will, for a integrative report, Ocean Solutions that Benefit People, Nature, and the Economy, which was a roadmap for not only what's happening now, but a vision for the future and a roadmap for how to get there. Based on that, the Ocean Panel itself has committed to a set of transformations that are acting on this knowledge. And so we are translating science into policy and action through this series of events. Now, because of the timeliness of the opportunity to address COVID, I'm going to focus specifically on this Sustainable and Equitable Blue Recovery report, whose authors you see here. And all of these products are available at oceanpanel.org in case you are interested in some further, a deeper dive. The assessment of what impact has COVID had on the ocean economy and the ocean sector and what opportunities exist to recover. That assessment was done in June of 2020. And so the information that I'll share was current as of then. Of course, there have been some new stimulus packages and other things, but I think the same messages still apply. This report highlighted the substantial and mostly unappreciated deep impacts that the pandemic has had on the ocean sector, direct and indirect impacts. And you see in this figure some of the different ways in which the ocean sector has been affected, from ocean tourism to the seafood sector, shipping, across all of these different activities in the ocean. There have been some very significant impacts, again, much greater than in other sectors. At the same time, the stimulus packages that were created to begin to address some of the economic fallout from COVID have, for the most part, pretty much ignored the ocean sector. Not completely, but the slice of the pie that is represented by the ocean is just a very small piece. You see here portions of the recovery packages that were non-environmentally relevant, those that are environmentally relevant, and then the ocean sector is just a small amount of this smaller piece of the pie. So there is huge opportunity that is unmet in this space. Some of the blue stimulus responses to date are shown here. I won't go through all of these, but you can see that there are a number of specific actions where individual countries have focused on some immediate opportunities. But this represents just a small amount of what the real total opportunities are. So there has been some effort. It's just not commensurate with either the magnitude of the impact or the opportunities that exist. And of course, the real opportunity here is not just in going back to the way things were, but taking the opportunity to make smart investments that will have long-term, address long-term problems and have long-term payoff. And so the authors of this report did a gap assessment looking at some of the opportunities that had not been addressed and flagged a number of ones that seemed like they would fit the criteria of being ripe for stimulus funding, deliver short-term economic boost, while at the same time providing longer-term sustainable benefits that would really be a smart investment. In so doing, the authors also identified some guiding principles, some priority opportunities that I'll tell you a little bit more, and then focusing on the kinds of transformations that would really get us to where we need to be, not to where we are. So, as was said before, using this crisis as an opportunity to be smarter, be better, to recover and become more resilient and prosperous. The 5 immediate opportunities that were identified include these. And again, these are opportunities where there has not been much attention that can immediately create jobs, bring some economic relief, but also help transform communities. For example, with sewage and waste treatment infrastructure, a chronic problem, fixing those could bring immense benefit in terms of both short-term job creation, but then also reductions in greenhouse gases, biodiversity benefits, health benefits. And so here is an opportunity that few are talking about that would bring immense benefit. Protecting, restoring coastal marine ecosystems is a second high priority immediate opportunity that was identified. Again, short-term job creation, but restoring habitats that in fact are blue carbon ecosystems, salt marshes, mangroves, seagrass beds that protect coastal areas, are important for fisheries, provide a wealth of benefits. Also creating marine protected areas, not only in coastal areas, but marine places. So multiple wins across these different spaces. Mariculture, especially in community-led, non-fed mariculture, so either seaweeds or bivalves are another golden opportunity. Ocean-based renewable energy seems like a very smart investment. Opportunities for creating clean energy from wind, wave, tidal, solar in the ocean are a very smart move. And then finally, decarbonizing shipping that is a huge need globally. So here are 5 priority opportunities to flag for you that are essentially no-brainers. They have immediate benefit and long-term benefit and can be exceptionally powerful. I want to flag for you the intersection of a number of those with the opportunity to mitigate climate change. And in so doing, draw upon a second special report that was commissioned by the Ocean Panel to answer the question, what opportunities do exist for ocean-based activities to help mitigate climate change? And you are all more than well aware of the impacts that climate change has had to the ocean. When most people think about the ocean and climate change, the focus is immediately on the impacts or on possibly the key role of the ocean in adaptation. But there, until this report came out, there had been very little attention to the opportunities to focus on ocean-based mitigation. And this report quantified the maximum potential benefit that could be achieved in terms of carbon emission reductions from a variety of coastal and marine activities shown in this slide here. And what they came up with were these ranges for each of those. And if you put those together, this slide depicts these 5 categories of ocean-based options for mitigating climate change. This shows the maximum annual emission reductions in gigatons of carbon emissions, carbon dioxide equivalents. And it shows that each of these different options, ocean-based renewable energy, decarbonizing shipping, restoring and protecting marine coastal ecosystems, fisheries, aquaculture, and dietary shifts, and carbon storage in the seabed. If you add up the maximum potential for all of those, you might get as much as 21% of the carbon emission reductions that are needed to get us to the 1.5 degree Paris target by 2050. Now, this was an astounding finding because the ocean just wasn't really on folks' radar screen as a serious mitigation option. And here we find that we have another powerful tool in our toolbox. It might be as much as 1/5 of the carbon emission reductions that we need. So this really was helpful in terms of getting people thinking in some new directions and exploring these. Now, I note that the authors highlighted these first 4 as being the immediate opportunities. A lot more work is needed on this fifth one, carbon storage in the seabed, to identify, to answer questions around technical feasibility, long-term impacts, and environmental impacts. So these first four are ones that really should be taken seriously. The additional recommendations from the COVID assessment report really highlighted, again, the opportunities to do not only immediate job creation through on-the-ground activities, but also the R&D to stimulate innovation and new technologies that is going to make some of these even more effective in the long term, and really reset the ocean economy. The key points in this whole effort were very much focused on not just a patchwork short-term throw money at something, but a significant investment that's going to pay off in both the short term and the long term, and looking for those synergies. So the key takeaways from this report from COVID recovery was thinking about immediate and long-term benefit. Really, the investments that are made now are going to have long-term ramifications. So let's be as smart about them as possible and focus squarely on sustainable ocean economy. Look for cross-sectoral benefits, pay special attention to the equity issues and the vulnerable workers, the marginalized folks, the people who have been so hard hit, but that are often not on the radar screen, and a very special focus on innovation. And so pulling out for a moment and drawing back, looking at the whole big picture, the Ocean Panel considered these COVID opportunities, but also the other work that was done on behalf of and by the Commission, by the panel, to acknowledge that in fact, if we are smart about what we do, a sustainable ocean economy could deliver so much more than what we are getting from the ocean now, and that is needed. And that doing so requires a more holistic understanding of how ocean wealth, ocean health, ocean equity, ocean knowledge, and ocean finance need to be integrated and complementary. And the reports from the panel really lay out an opportunity to pursue those. These 14 heads of state are committed to a series of transformations so that the knowledge that has been generated is now focused squarely on action and policy. So we've taken knowledge to policy and action with an invitation to other countries, to the private sector, to civil society and others to join forces. And indeed,
could you
yes,
please come to the final?
I absolutely will. These 10 action coalitions have been set in motion as partnerships across these multi-stakeholder groups. Many of these were set in motion thanks to Maria Damanakis' work and provide some immediate points of intersection for other entities to join forces. And so in summary, the mantra of the panel has been very much, the ocean is not too big to fail. It's also not too big to fix. It is absolutely too big and too central to our future to ignore. And that's as true for COVID recovery as it is for anything else. And so I've highlighted how the ocean sector has been disproportionately affected, has been mostly absent in stimulus recovery plans, huge opportunities in that space. And I hope that that can help stimulate some great discussions by this group. So with my thanks, I will turn this back to all of you and look forward to the rest of the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lubchenco. It was very difficult to interrupt you because it was full of very important messages. And also, I really thank you very much for being with us so early in the morning. I understood that it's still not 6 a.m. where you are. So thank you very much. We appreciate a lot the effort. And that was extremely useful. I just want to pinpoint that what you call the no-brainers. Maybe that's because I'm French, but I think they are all very well thought. So it took a lot of brains to be so specific in the way you pinpointed, for instance, community-led, non-fed mariculture as one of the no-brainers on which we need to. Once you have thought of them, we don't need to think anymore because they are key solutions. And I think that's lots of very important knowledge that you and proposals, very operational proposals that you put on the table. So I would turn directly to David Obura. Dear David, I presented you as one of our key personalities from the Western Indian Ocean's community around this marine region. How would you react and comment on what's happened in your region? Specificity, commonalities, or other comments you would like to make? Please, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Sebastian, and good morning, good afternoon, or evening to all on the call. So it's a great privilege to speak in this forum, and I do want to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. And as Jane has mentioned, and it's a great privilege to speak after you, Jane. I've admired you in science for many years since graduate school. I speak on the backs of many from the Western Indian Ocean region who have really pushed forward in marine conservation and marine sustainability over the last few decades, and some of whom are on this call as well. So I'll just give a bit of experience from what we saw in Kenya and other countries in the Western Indian Ocean and Eastern Africa in terms of the short-term impacts of the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns. And then I'll transition to some thinking we've tried to do about long-term impacts and responses and how to build back better, build forward better, and move on, and also the role of the marine regions in terms of supporting that movement forward. So COVID-19 has impacted small-scale fishes dramatically in the Western Indian Ocean, and we have seen a number of ways. There's been obviously the direct impact to health and some deaths, of course, but unfortunately we have almost no statistics at the local level to really be able to disaggregate. There's been a huge impact on economy of fishers because of the lockdowns. So the frequency and type of fishing activities, the reduced access to markets, so they can't sell their product, time to find buyers. A lot of small scale fishers need to find buyers or need to, they need to bicycle or walk or go by motorbike taxis to meet with market people, and they can't do that. And of course, there's been a reduced demand from restaurants, hotels, because the tourism industry in the coastal zone has collapsed dramatically because of the COVID pandemic. There's been an immense loss of jobs and closure of local businesses, and that has really affected a lot of people. And also migration from urban areas to rural areas, so out of the main city centers, once people could, after the first lockdowns, because they had no jobs, many had to go back to their rural areas, whether on the coast or up country. And of course, that has an impact on the local economies, as well as on actual COVID transmission as well. We saw a big expansion in COVID beyond the main urban centers at the end of the first lockdowns in Kenya in particular. There's been big challenges in the shipping and transport industries. Seamen have been stranded at sea on ships for over a year, and that has huge social and personal and income implications for them and for others, and of course for all the businesses. So this was seen, and I think these are not surprises so much. And as Jane has mentioned, a lot of these impacts have been somewhat unseen in the broader focus on COVID impacts to broader economies. But to look at how to come out of this situation, so Cordio, together with Rios Partners, which is a social enterprise, we put together a sort of 4 two-hour workshop series in September, October to try and get participants from around the world to think forward about what are the long-term implications on ocean sustainability in the areas we work in. And one of the outputs has been a white paper to the Nairobi Convention for its Science Policy Forum. So that's one of the key marine regions engaged in these discussions. And a big focus in this white paper has been on something that I found quite striking in the discussions we had. So of course, there's a lot of negative impacts, but people really strive to find the positives. So how do we strengthen the positives and transform the negatives in coming out of this situation? And so, for example, You could look at scenarios in terms of doing this. So from the economic recession, do we learn to regrow and adapt and get inspiration from the hardships? Or do we retreat and protect and go into more siloed thinking? Or with the increase in digitalization during the pandemic and the lockdowns, do we use this to help connect our worlds as we're doing now? Or does it contribute to increasing the digital divide? We also thought of some strategic implications, and there are about 7 of these, but 2 that really stand out related to some of the recommendations from the high-level panel report are to reduce ecosystem pressures and threats and to build resilience. And of course, this relates very directly to the experience in Western Indian Ocean countries and those very dependent on fishing and direct use of ecosystem services. There's also very clear synergies with the top global agenda of this super year, which is extended from 2020 to 2021 in terms of the 2 big COPs we're waiting for on climate and biodiversity. And while there's a big negative in these delays, there's also positive in that it's given us an unprecedented amount of time to prepare for these and to contribute to the discussions and try to get considered thinking into how to deal with biodiversity loss and climate change. And I think we need to really take advantage of that. So I'll make 2 main points for marine regions now in moving forward and opportunities that are possible. And one relates around the equality and equity question that has already come up. So is COVID the great equalizer? No one is immune, rich or poor, but poorer and weaker communities are much more vulnerable to the drain of energy and resources that these lockdowns and the actual sickness pose. So the lack of safety nets is a huge problem. And COVID is not acting in isolation. The overwhelming message from Eastern Africa, where we've been fortunately less vulnerable to the actual sickness of COVID, is the economic hardships that come with the lockdowns, and that only widens the inequalities and makes it harder for people to deal with everything else. You know, we suffer from malaria, from road accidents, from hunger, trying to keep children in school. Why such a big focus on COVID, yet we don't get support in all these other areas? And I think really addressing these issues of international equity have been brought out by the COVID pandemic. So I think the SDG model is sufficient to deal with this. We already heard about the One Health for the pandemic. You know, with I love that icon, the circle of the SDGs. So you can look inwards from any of the SDGs to the others. How do we connect these? And so what we do for One Health with the pandemic, we can integrate with what we do for blue economy, reducing carbon, increasing equity, and so on. And I think the role of the marine regions can really help in the international community. In one is in the collective voice of blocks, really this for ocean sustainability now, really in the negotiations that move forward in the oceans and SDG space, really holding this space, particularly for the smaller countries with less of a voice, is in prioritization of support to the neediest, both countries and within countries as well, to deal with equity and equality. And then also in facilitating pathways for support, the investment and capacity building that are needed, that are highlighted in the high-level panel report. And from our experience in the Western Indian Ocean is really about this sustainable, resilient ocean economies and communities into the long term. So thank you.
Thank you very much, David. That was very, very useful to have your comments also from Kenya and from the Western Indian Ocean. For the sake of time, I think we might not be able to completely end at 3:30, so we might have to take 5 minutes more so that we can have a conversation with the 3 other panelists and with David and Jane when they want to interact. So I would directly turn to the first panelist, Kerstin Stendal. Kerstin, you're at UN Environment. How and to what extent are marine regions, and particularly marine environmental cooperation, affected by the current crisis? What would be your assessment of this, of the impacts on this issue of cooperation in particular?
Thank you very much, and thank you to all for this extremely well organized and truly interesting webinar workshop. I take my lead from Alexander and note all protocol observed. I think we have heard extremely well argumented views on or facts about where we're at when it comes to the impact of on countries, on regions from COVID. And I think Jane's Jane's comments about the different impacts was spot on. This is what we're seeing. This is what we're seeing in the regions. We are seeing, you know, the fact that tourists aren't there, and it means a spillover effect on aquaculture, agriculture, fisheries, and this is and we also hear now of quite tremendous losses in both jobs and income in some of our regions. And I also pick up on the fact that this is, of course, COVID is not treating all regions equally. So we will have certain of our regional seas and regions being extremely hard hit and with very little buffer and with very little safeguards, as David also recognized. Then from a governance perspective, I see also what is happening now is that we are postponing, we are delaying both international programs, projects, implementation of these. We are seeing a slowing down also in coming together when it comes to our governing body meetings of our regional seas, but also of multilateral agreements in general. This means also a skeptical view from some of our countries about whether confidentiality and diplomacy can actually be implemented and safeguarded through virtual means. And I also see that we are losing out on some of the effectiveness of our negotiations by the fact that we are not able to interact person to person. So this is the lay of the land, as it were, right now. I also think the focus will now have to be on SDGs, on rebounding. We are hearing quite dismal predictions of how much we are now losing our way when it comes to achieving the SDGs. And the mere fact that so many are now of our coastal communities, their livelihoods are heavily impacted in a truly negative way. I would also like to just note in terms of equity that we don't know yet, but we have some sense that we will have to have a very close look at now at what's happening to women and what is happening to children when it comes to COVID impacts, and tackle those from also a gender mainstreaming point of view. So in this situation, it's not an equal world that we are faced with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kerstin. That was extremely important also to understand the impacts on the capacity for people to coordinate, which is, of course, what we experience all in our little Zoom windows. But that's particularly important when coordination between countries is so important. I think we have a problem of connection with our colleague from FAO. I'm not sure that she's going to be able to participate, but we are working on it. I just wanted to welcome also Chip Cunliffe. Chip, as a co-chair of the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, what is your take on the impacts of COVID crisis on building resilience to ocean-related risks? What has it changed?
Well, look, first of all, thank you very much for asking me to speak today. It's a privilege to do so with all of you. Look, I think that we know there are various impacts, as Jane and others have already alluded to, whether it be travel restrictions and supply chain disruption through to revenue losses for people in local communities. But of course, that the ripple effect is likely to be to impact very much further than just the blue economy. I think there's a lot of work that we are continuing to undertake, and no one, I don't really think, is taking their eye off the ball. And indeed, I think we're all still in agreement that tackling climate and biodiversity loss is more important than ever, given the where we now find ourselves. In saying that, I think that there's a real key need to drive investment into the space more quickly than ever. I know that, you know, from the point of view of you know, everything from aquaculture and marine biotechnology to renewables and transport and marine transport, hugely important, and all of those will provide, you know, I think probably long-term potential for innovation and employment and economic growth. However, we still need to keep focus on climate change and food security and the environment, and we need to do that by investing in and ensuring investment is driven into the right spaces. One of the things I haven't done is to talk really about ecosystems, and I think that's a really key focus in terms of building resilience. And, you know, we know that the adaptation and the benefits, or the climate adaptation benefits of things like mangroves and seagrass beds and reefs, etc., are hugely important, alongside, you know, the protection that they provide coastlines, etc. But I think there's a real need to place a dollar value on those ecosystems, and then they can start to be integrated into our investment strategies. And I think that's very much sort of where, you know, the finance industry, you know, writ large, can help to do that. And indeed, that's part of what Obura, you know, the alliance has been set up to do, is to drive blended finance and work across public-private partnerships, and identify where those barriers are to driving that investment into the space. You know, so we have a focus on driving $500 million into coastal natural capital by 2030, and identify new projects to invest in, which will hopefully you know, look to build resilience in those coastal communities that are likely to be impacted most, and especially for the impact on women and girls. I think very briefly before I finish, I think, you know, that there's a key role for the insurance industry in here. In terms of disaster risk management, we need to really sort of focus the funds into risk reduction prior to things like COVID and you know, and major disasters actually taking place. I think, you know, 12% of funds are put into risk reduction, whereas 88% are put in either during or after a disaster. That needs to change. We need to sort of flip that on its head, as where possible. And so, you know, we are working on developing risk models, I think, for the first time in the insurance industry, to integrate ecosystems, so that we have a better understanding, we can price risk better. There's a coastal risk index that we're working on currently. We're working on some work, we're looking at the impact of IUU fishing and the, I suppose, the adoption of measures that we can use within the insurance industry to reduce risk on insuring those vessels. And, you know, I just think it's a great time to reset our focus on this space. And I think it's, you know, this COVID, although has been devastating, provide us with that time, as people have already talked about, to reset our focus and to prepare for the future.
Thanks a lot, Chip. I have received a message from Sebastian that it's my turn to take over. And before I'm raising a question to Kerstin and a question to you, Chip, I would like to ask Peter Thompson if he could briefly intervene 3 minutes on what he has heard from your perspective. The impact of COVID on marine regions. Do we get enough funds? Where are the opportunities? We had not asked you to prepare a speech, so we wanted your on-the-spot reaction on what you have heard, and then I'm coming back to Kerstin and Chip again. Peter, 3 minutes for you, and thanks a lot for joining us.
Not at all, and I'll speak quickly because 3 minutes short time. Raise your hand when I get to that 3 minutes, will you? Look, these fantastic presentations. I think that, you know, I'm not an optimist or a pessimist. As a grandfather, I have to be just a hard-headed pragmatist. And I think we've been dealt a pretty good hand of cards at the moment. I think the next 50 years are actually going to be very positive on this net zero carbon. Now look at what President Xi said in September. Look at the Biden administration coming in. Look at the EU Green Deal. You know, there's a lot of good stuff happening now, which is starting to point us in the right direction. Obviously, Glasgow is the important bit. But the sustainable and equitable blue recovery that Jane presented so beautifully there. You know, I talk about the blue-green recovery road out of this pandemic, and I was really happy to hear Veronica talk about the sustainable blue economy having been written into the EU Green Deal. We're really going to hold you to that, and would like to talk detail about that. I've got just a couple of points I want to make for everybody's information, because you're all friends here, and this doesn't need to be Chatham House rules, because it was announced by the President of the General Assembly last week in the General Assembly, which is that we're going to have this high-level meeting in support of SDG 14 at the United Nations. He said in the summer of 21, we're trying to get it done in June. It'll be a day's meeting, which is basically because we cannot have the UN Ocean Conference this year for pandemic reasons. That postponement is continuing into 2022. We're aiming at spring of 2022, but obviously this is very much up to when Portugal feels that it's able to host for the safety of everybody concerned. So that high-level meeting, I'm actually writing a paper now, multitasking on what that high-level meeting will be in June, but I'm sure it's something you're all going to be involved in. The last point that I wanted to make, because I must be near 3 minutes, was the Glasgow COP. And in fact, Chris and Tileki and I have been sending emails to each other today about this. You know, we need to really build on what the Madrid COP gave us for the ocean, and make sure that the ocean is front and center when we get to Glasgow. And we all know the reasons why it has to be. But part of that should be having another ocean pavilion. So I just plant that seed in all your heads. Let's have another ocean pavilion in Glasgow, as we did in Madrid, and the good number of us that will be prepared to get involved in that. But great workshop, really enjoy it. Sorry that I have to run, but I've really appreciated getting together with all you colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Peter, for joining us. And you still have 10 seconds off. In the next Marine Regions workshop, you will have additional 10 seconds, and I will spare it for you. Thanks a lot. Now coming back to Kerstin. Kerstin, the pragmatism presented by Peter, how can you translate it? How can you translate the One Health approach and operationalize it for example, in the CBD post-2020 framework? So how to translate what we have heard here, great presentations. The truth is always happening on the ground. Do you have an idea in 2 minutes how to translate it on action on the ground on CBD? And then I'm going to ask Chip, and please prepare yourself, how is the insurance industry helping us in getting the necessary money to translate it the action on the ground? First of all, Kerstin, please. Your microphone is still muted, Kerstin.
Can you now hear me? Excellent, thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think it's true. I think that you know, I don't want to say that COVID comes with opportunities, because it's too cynical to say so. But what COVID has shown us is that when it comes to a real threat against human health, the governments of the world tend to react fairly quickly to protect human health in you know, among the population in their countries. And I think we have seen it before also in multilateral environmental negotiations and agreements. In my former life, I worked with the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm conventions on chemicals and waste. And it was very clear that when it came to, you know, the human threat component, it was it made it more urgent to also regulate, for example, persistent organic pollutants, and countries felt to some extent more secure in so doing and compelled to do it. I don't say that we did not also, regulate and put substances on banned lists because of environmental threats, but it was a very weighty argument when human health was involved, and I think that's the opportunity that COVID brings us. How will it? I think here also it's very much now about awareness raising. Yes, I understand that the financial flows need to be redirected, and we need to reprioritize. We need to build back better. It needs to be a green building back. But at the same time, I think it's also about people understanding that this is extremely important. What we are also seeing is that you mentioned, Alexander, on the ground, that pressure and that realization has to also happen within our communities at the local level, supported by regional and national governance frameworks. So there I see that we as the Regional Seas Programme have a huge challenge to, as you say, how do we then operationalize the threats from zoonosis, from antibiotic resistance, from algae blooming, which is a concrete threat to our health. How do we make the connection between the fact that we are polluting our oceans, we are warming our oceans, we are overusing our oceans, and this all leads one thing to another. There is a root cause to all of this, and how that root cause leads to direct impact on human health. And I think that's, we talked about it already. It's about capacity building, it's about awareness raising, and it's about support. And how to get it right. I also think that the Regional Seas Programme at the moment is also a true opportunity, in the sense that we are facing and we have for some time faced challenges when it comes to multilateral negotiations. It's not always easy to reach consensus. It is easier to do so at the regional level, because we can see that. Yes.
I'm sorry. I know first I'm raising an incredibly complex question, and I'm giving you 2 minutes and I'm interrupting you. I apologize. Before giving the floor to Chip, we have 46 participants, and after Chip, I'm going to read which questions you have put into the chat. So if you have a question to the discussants, to Chip, to Kerstin, or all the others who have spoken so far, please raise a question. We will try to have 10 minutes so that we have a warm up for the discussion. Chip, I'm coming back to you. How could blue finance support sustainable recovery? And what is the role for insurance sector to improve risk preparedness of marine regions? And I listened very carefully that you were raising the question, do we have to put a price on ecosystems so that we can value the risk? And if we value the risk, we will all end up in money, in investment. You also have 2 minutes, and then we are opening the floor for additional questions.
Well, look, thank you. Look, I think that there's a real need for, the finance sector more generally is always looking for areas to place their investments. The question is what the return is likely to be, and evidently, I remember being at the World Ocean Summit a couple of years ago, and there was a question about how and where banks should invest in the blue economy. And the only answer that came back was about renewables. I mean, of course, that's not quite the case. There's a huge amount of, the blue economy is huge. And so that it's very much about sort of driving investment into different areas. The use of insurance to, let's say, de-risk, but really to transfer that risk is critical. But to be able to do that, we need the data that we can utilize to better understand the likelihood of something going wrong. And then I think that there's a key piece here about the use of public-private partnerships, bringing the multilaterals together alongside governments and the private sector. And indeed, based on science and the information from the NGO community, I think are really critical areas to help provide the information that will be required for investment into the space. I talked briefly about the barriers, and I think there is this lack of pipeline of investable products or projects. There's certainly a lack of data for the investors to be able to better determine where their investment should go. And I also think, lastly, there's the inadequate enabling policies in some areas for investments to be placed. So I think that those are three critical barriers that need to be overcome to help investors to drive money into this space. Yeah, I mean, there are various things that we're doing at the moment, but maybe I can go into those if any of the questions, or once the questions come up.
Thanks a lot. I have seen the first question in the chat to Jane Lubchenko. I'm reading out the question. The 14 heads are being very ambitious in their aspirations. Sitting here in Jamaica, because Lorna from the Cartagena Convention Secretariat raised this question. I'm pleased that our hosts are included, but the devil is always in the details. That's very true. How is all this supposed to happen? So the question translated into a diplomatic question is, what kind of policies do we have to change, and where do you have to raise awareness in order to make this happen so that the devils are going to listen?
Thank you so much. That's a great question. There's no one simple, one-size-fits-all response that each country is going to do. It's not a cookie cutter kind of thing. And so each country is taking stock of its own opportunities in training the relevant agencies, departments, ministries, as well as local communities, everyone that needs to be involved. The overarching commitment that the 14 global leaders made was to, by 2025, create a sustainable ocean plan for its ocean waters, and to have be managing that ocean space sustainably using that sustainable ocean plan. And so much of the action for many of the countries is going to be building the participatory processes to create those sustainable ocean plans. And that will be a very exciting enterprise. Jamaica is one of the countries that is committed to that, involved in that. Fortunately, there are funds and technical expertise that are being made available through the World Bank and through one of the action coalitions that is been set in motion. So this is an exciting opportunity, and that's just one example of what is happening next. Kristen Teleke, who is with us, could provide more detail, or Maria Damanaki, if there's additional interest in following up.
Thanks a lot. I guess there is lots of interest, and therefore I'm going to move the break for the coffee 5 minutes into the future, and you will have to drink your coffee hotter and faster. The next question is coming from Jeremy Fossey, Eco-Union, to all the panelists, and I will only ask one to reply. In view of the urgency to respond to COVID crisis, shall we use the current ocean governance system with all its weaknesses and strengths, or better focus on building new ad hoc sectorial multi-actors ocean economy governance? Who wants to answer this question? I'm asking you, Kerstin, because the next question is for Chip. So I'm asking you, Kerstin, sorry for the difficult question, but if other speakers also want to intervene, please let me know. So is the current governance system fit for urgent action, or do we need something new, and how much time will it take?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a wonderful question. I think it's an excellent question. My question would be, do we have time to build another governance system than the one we have at the moment? Because and the reason why I say it is because of the lengthiness of our international negotiations at the moment. It is not. It is, as I said before, it's not easy to come to consensus. Also, can we afford them? And that's another because once we start readjusting our governance system, we create an implementation gap with the old system, and also, you know, then we use funding. And I have to say that already our regional Cs are struggling when it comes to funding and support from governments because of the new priorities, and that's why you know, it's always a risk then to try and start something new and deviate from the funding channels that we have at the moment. I think our system at the moment is actually agile enough because of the regional Cs, because of the fact that countries can come together and you know, it's open to them to really decide within that region what they want to do, and they are able to include stakeholders, multi-stakeholder actors, and bring that in. I think there's nothing in our governance system at the moment that that hinders us to look at you know, different kinds of implementing our action plans, our conventions. So I would say that we're okay when it comes to governance, but we can use it much more efficiently.
Thanks a lot. I have the next question. Mary Matthews, UNDP Water and Ocean Governance Program, CHIP. The question is, what sort of institutional mechanism is needed to move the funding towards sustainable ocean management, pilot efforts and innovations? I was working at the UN also, and I would translate it into, where can I get the money?
Yes, well, I mean, I'll take it more literally for a second, but so I think, look, I don't think there is only one mechanism. I think we need to use everything in the toolbox, and you know, I think a lot of that is starting to become more and more evident at this stage. So everything from, you know, I think insurance evidently is one. I mean, in fact, you know, some of the work that has been done in the insurance, in fact, the banking industry, about drafting policies for you know, net zero emissions in shipping, I think are all critical, and you know, we need to sort of start to think about insurance as one side. I think impact investment is evidently another. I mean, I don't see this as being one. I don't think it's just one thing. I think it needs to be a raft of measures integrated depending upon the program and the focus that we're trying to deliver against. And that's why, you know, one of the reasons Obura has been set up to really to bring together all of these different actors to help identify the ways in which we should start to develop funding solutions to some of these major issues.
Thanks a lot. I would like to use this opportunity to ask either if David, you want to provide a brief comment to the questions raised on observation, or I also would like, and this is unusual, to ask if someone else would like to provide a comment. We have 2 more minutes before the coffee break starts.
Okay, thank you, Alexander. I will take you up on that, because I would like to just add perhaps to what Kerstin said on the governance issue, is that I fully agree. I don't think we have time to develop a new one, but I think a key thing in the ocean sector is the issue of tenure, and there are more degrees of freedom on land, which is very challenging. It also gives us a chance to leapfrog a few barriers that we've had on land in terms of dealing with governance. And I think this issue of devolving power and empowerment down to communities, to local governments, to those places that really depend directly on the marine environment for stewardship and governance is a critical one. And the connectivity in the marine environment really forces us to connect among jurisdictions a lot more. So I think if we can really build that or evolve that, I think that would be a big step forward. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Anybody else for 1 minute? If not, we are going into the break. The break is now 5 minutes. And when you come back, you will see that we have divided all of you into 3 different groups. Because in the groups, you will have a moderated discussion, and the results of this discussion will be brought back to the plenary, which is going to start again at the breakout groups between 15:30 and 16:45 European time. And you will come back after 16:45. There is a break. We will have it for 10 minutes, and then we will have 15 minutes. We will have an opportunity to discuss what you are going to bring back from the working groups, and we will have a brief discussion. This will be for 30 minutes. In the German time, it's 5 o'clock to 5:30. So now we are having quarter to 4, 5 minutes break, working groups, facilitated working groups, and then please bring all your ideas to the table, because what we are going to do in the end is we are going to summarize what are the lessons you have brought to the table, what kind of new challenges you have identified, and please also consider the governance question and the question of institutional mechanisms in order to keep, or in order to move things on the ground. Because again, last sentence, the Marine Regions Forum wants to support both the regions in their efforts to change things on the ground, and we also want to support international negotiations to better understand the needs and the opportunities of the regions. Thanks a lot. 5 minutes. I'm asking my colleagues from Potsdam, is there anything else to be added now for housekeeping? I have seen Laura has already put the 3 groups where we have assigned you to on the screen, so you can see, and you will be assigned to it. Is there anything else to be added? 5 minutes for your coffee. Drink it fast and hot. Thanks a lot. Great discussion so far.